Hi everyone, welcome back. I am so happy you're here today. I've got kind of a strange story to tell you though. The last couple of weeks we've been studying the creation of the world and of the first people, Adam and Eve. Well, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, remember, and we are told all about creation in that. Exodus is only the second book of the Bible, but soon lots of people already lived on the earth, but many of them were already causing some problems, not just Adam and Eve when they sinned. Do you remember this summer how we studied the life of Joseph? How his brothers almost killed him, but instead they sold him into slavery. But God had a special plan for Joseph though. Joseph ended up saving his brothers and his father and all of the Egyptian people from the famine. And so we start reading in Exodus chapter 1, and we find out that Joseph dies eventually, and his brothers do. And a new Pharaoh was in charge soon after that, and he didn't know about Joseph at all, but he was just horrible. He decided that the Hebrews should work as slaves. Remember, they had come during the famine to get food in Egypt. And he had the Egyptian officials make them work really hard, and they were not treated well at all. Remember, the Hebrew people, though, were God's people. They loved God, and they tried to follow God's rules. Well, Pharaoh and his officials started counting, and they realized that the number of Hebrew people was growing more and more and more. They were having babies, and those babies were growing up. Well, Pharaoh started worrying that soon the number of Hebrews would be higher than the number of Egyptians, and he wouldn't be able to convince them to stay working as slaves if they could overpower him and his armies. Well, that really bothered him. And so he came up with the most horrible plan I could ever imagine. He decided to kill all of the Hebrew baby boys. I guess he didn't think the girls would fight him. And that was just awful. A Hebrew baby boy, though, was born, and the parents did everything they could to hide the baby so that he wouldn't be killed. They loved their baby boy. But the baby was getting bigger and bigger, and he was harder to hide. He probably was noisier. Well, the mom was very brave, and she prayed and she prayed, and she decided to make a basket that would float. So this is maybe something like it. She wove a basket, and she put tar in it so that it would float and it would be waterproof basically. And she put the baby in the basket, and she put the basket in the river to float down the river. That sounds horrible too. But remember, she was praying to God, and he helped her make that decision. So the mom sent her older daughter, Miriam, to follow alongside the river, to walk along the bank and watch that her baby brother was okay. Well, that still seems like a scary plan, but God knew exactly what was going to happen. Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, was bathing in the river. Remember, they didn't have bathtubs or anything like that. So they would go to the river, and she was there when baby Moses started floating by. Well, the young princess heard Moses cry, and she sent her servants to get Moses out of the water. In fact, the name Moses means coming out of the water. She wanted to keep this baby for her own and save it and take care of it. Well, Miriam, being a great big sister, hurried over to tell the princess that she knew somebody who would take care of this little baby boy for her. Can you believe this? Moses' mom got paid. She was hired to take care of her own son that the Pharaoh had wanted to kill. God is so amazing. He worked it out so that Moses could live and that he could grow up in the palace, but his mom would still be able to take care of him. So he had lots of wonderful things going on. He got to still be with his mom, and he got to live in the palace. Well, that's exactly what happened. Moses grew up living in the palace, even though he was a Hebrew instead of an Egyptian. Well, he was even in charge of some of the people that were working as slaves when he was older. And he wasn't working as a slave. But one day, he was looking out a window and he saw one of the Hebrew slaves being beaten by an Egyptian. He got so angry. He decided to fight with the Egyptian soldier, and he killed the man. Well, he didn't realize anybody else had seen that. And he tried to hide it. Remember, we can't hide anything from God. We can sometimes hide things from other people, but we can't hide anything from God. Well, Moses was scared, and it very quickly came out that he had been seen. And Pharaoh found out about it, and he tried to kill Moses. Moses ran far away. He decided to hide in the desert in an area called Midian. Well, Moses just started a whole new life there. He became a shepherd, and he got married, and he had a son. He just left his previous life behind. God had different plans for him, though, and God always knows best. Well, Moses shouldn't have killed the man, but God had a special purpose in mind when he saved Moses as a baby. I love that. Moses knew that he had been chosen specially by God, but that still didn't help him have the faith that he needed to. Moses one day was leading his flock of sheep to an area called Horeb, and God decided to get his attention. Moses saw a bush that was on fire. Well, that probably seemed strange enough, but it was even more weird because the bush wasn't burning up. He got closer and closer. Normally, bushes would be gone quickly. They are wood and brush, and that's exactly what burns fast in a fire. But this was different. The fire kept going, but the bush did not burn up at all. When Moses got close to the bush, he even heard the voice of God. He called him by name. In Exodus 3, verse 5, he told Moses from the bush to take off his sandals because he was standing on holy ground. God is pure holiness, and he was right there with Moses. Well, Moses did exactly what he said. Well, God told Moses that he had heard the voices of the Hebrew people, and they were crying out to him and begging to be set free from slavery, and that he had heard them. He told Moses that he had a special land set aside just for them. We call it the Promised Land because God was promising it to them. Well, he also told Moses that he had been chosen to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Wow, what an important job. Moses could not believe what he was hearing. He answered, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh?" Think about it. When Moses ran away to Midian in the first place, Pharaoh was trying to kill him. Why would he want to go back there? Well, God promised that he would be with Moses and that it would be okay. But Moses really didn't believe that the Israelites would just get up and follow him. He was not important enough. And they probably knew what he had done to the Egyptian. Well, God showed his power to help Moses believe. This is not my favorite part. He told Moses to take the shepherd's staff. Remember, a staff is like a curved stick that they would use to kind of pull sheep in a certain direction if they needed to guide them. He told him to throw it to the ground. Well, Moses did. And do you know what happened? It turned into a serpent or a snake. Yuck. And then he told Moses to grab it by its tail and pick it up. I think I would just pass out then, if I hadn't already after watching the burning bush. Well, Moses grabbed up the serpent's tail, and it turned right back into a staff. Time to go buy a new staff at Walmart, right? Well, Moses was still having trouble believing, even after all that. Come on, a burning bush, a staff that turns into a snake, and then back to a staff. What more could he need to see? But he didn't have enough faith, and God was patient. He understands that sometimes our faith is not strong enough. So he gave Moses another sign. This one's kind of gross too. He told Moses to take his hand and put it inside his coat. And when he pulled it out, it was like his flesh was kind of gross, missing, eaten up with a disease called leprosy. Yuck. And then he told Moses to put it back in his coat. And when he pulled it out, it was all healed again. It was perfect. He told Moses to do these things so that he would trust in him. Well, Moses, he was still not sure, but he told him that he would give him special powers when he got to the Israelites. That if he would scoop up some water from the Nile River. Remember, the Nile River was the river that Moses had been floated down on to meet the princess in the beginning of our story. But that water, when he scooped it up, when he poured it on the ground, it was going to turn into blood. And that it would make the people realize that God was with Moses and that he had God's powers with him. This is like a scary movie, right? Well, Moses was scared. Nothing was helping him believe that God had chosen the right one. God doesn't make mistakes. Well, there was one more thing that you needed to know about Moses. He stuttered. That means that he couldn't always speak clearly. Now, in our world, we know that when people who stutter are still very smart, their mouth and their voice can't always keep up with how fast their brain is. And so there's nothing wrong with them. They're certainly not dumb. They just have trouble with their mouth making it move fast enough. But back then, we didn't know as much about medicine. And people probably believed that someone who stuttered was dumb or that God was punishing them. And so Moses didn't think anyone would listen to him. But that's exactly why God chose him. He wanted it to be his powers that were showing that he would get the glory for it. Well, the Bible tells us that God was beginning to get angry at Moses because he wouldn't believe. And so when Moses asked one more time to see if anybody else could do it, Moses was told by God that he would allow Aaron, his brother, to join him and do the speaking for him. But there is always a consequence when we don't follow God's law and God's instructions at the very first time. Remember, we've talked about that many times, that obedience means you do it immediately. And God was very patient with Moses, but Moses still was not believing that God had the power to do what he was saying he was going to do. Well, you're going to have to wait a couple of weeks to find out what that consequence was, unless you read ahead in Exodus. Well, I hope you think about what we talked about this week. God has a special purpose for you and for me, for all of us. He wants to show us what that special purpose is. And we learn it by praying and studying his word. He will also give us everything we need to accomplish that purpose, so we never have to be afraid like Moses was. We just have to trust in him. Wow, what an awesome God. I also hope that you remember that God and Jesus love you more than you can imagine. Hi everyone. I don't have my lab completely ready yet, but it's okay because this experiment needed to be outside anyway, and you'll see why in just a minute. So our Bible story today was about Moses, and we start learning about Moses in the book of Exodus, which is very early on in our Bible, Genesis and then Exodus. Well, we learned about Moses as a baby, but then as he grew up, he got into some trouble and ran away kind of from home, although he was a grown-up, and he went just to live in a different area. Well, God had different plans for Moses, and so he was not going to let Moses just give that plan up. He wanted him to see what it was and what he could do with God's strength. Well, to get Moses' attention, remember, he made a bush, this is my bush, that was on fire, but it didn't burn up. If I burned another bush up, I don't want to kill a bush, so I'm not going to put one on fire. It would burn in just a couple seconds. The wood would just burn up fast. Well, God made the bush burn, as in on fire, but it didn't burn away. And so it caught Moses' attention when he was out taking care of his flocks. And so I thought it would be fun to do a science experiment that would be like a burning bush. Now, I don't have God's powers, okay? I'm using some other science to make something look like it, but it's not a real bush, okay? So I don't have any of God's powers, but I just wanted you to get an idea of what it might look like. Let's see if it looks the same as what Moses saw. So I have something in my pocket here, and I'll explain it afterwards, but I'm gonna see if I can make this bush be on fire and not burn. Stay with me a little bit. It's gonna take me a little bit to get it going. Kind of cool. I'll explain what I'm doing later. I want to concentrate on my fire first. Make sure I'm being safe. You can't do this at home. Only grown-ups can do this one. It requires a lot of stuff that would be dangerous. Get this area burning too. Well, this one doesn't want to burn right here, does it? Still burning a little bit. So that was pretty cool, wasn't it? This is a metal wall hanging that I have that's like a tree. It didn't burn up. It caught on fire, but it didn't burn up. Metal doesn't usually burn, right? But this is covered with something called steel wool. And that's just very thin fiber. Sometimes mom or dad might use it in the kitchen to clean a pot. They make a steel wool with cleaner in it that will scrape off things that are hard on it. But you can buy it for other reasons too that don't have the cleaner in it. But I took a battery, a 9-volt battery, and when both of the positive and the negative charge touch the steel wool at the same time, it heats it up and causes the spark. So you can still see that I did it. Okay, I have water here, and I have, actually I wouldn't want to use water unless it was just hitting the grass in my yard. I have a fire extinguisher ready, so if it did it. But it's pretty cool, right? It just, so that friction causes it to burn, but the bush is still the same as it was when I started. It did not burn away. Pretty cool. I bet Moses was even more amazed at what God did that day. I hope you have a great week, and remember, Jesus loves you more than you can imagine.